Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Research Data Management in Your Future, which is sponsored by Elsevier. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, the structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for and developments by other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side of the panel, to activate the chat panel, you can click the button that's trying real hard to look like a dialog cloud at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A panel to submit questions to our speakers. And at the end of the presentation, they'll take a few minutes to answer your questions, so please do send those questions in throughout. If you experience any technical issues, please use the chat panel to let me know, and I'll troubleshoot the issue with you privately. We are using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars today, so if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. Our speakers today are Gene Shipman and Nikhil Joshi. Gene P. Shipman, MSLS, AHIP, FMLA, is the VP Global Library Relations for Elsevier. And Nikhil Joshi is a Solutions Manager for Research Data Management at Elsevier in North America. So with that, we are ready to get started. And I will hand the presentation over to you, Gene.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Mark, for the technology to make talking to all of you today possible. It's my pleasure to describe a program that's under development currently called the Research Data Management Librarian Academy. And I'll be talking today about how the Academy came to be, why the evidence showed that an academy such as this is needed, and then what the Academy actually is. So with that in mind, I will go forward. Like I said, I'm going to do an overview of the commonly called RDMLA, since Research Data Management Librarian Academy is a little mouthful, who the partners are in this project, who the team members are, the faculty, what our timeline is, and then what the program will include as far as curriculum units. And then also the good news is that we will be offering continuing education credit through Simmons School of Library and Information Science. And then I'll wrap up with the next steps. So what is the RDMLA? It's an online educational program that we're preparing to offer individuals to learn more about research data management practices. And individuals, we're tailoring primarily librarians with this program, but there will be components that you as a librarian can use to help educate researchers within your institutions, as well as researchers being able to self-educate through taking these units. The program is developed by a team of librarians in the Northeast who have had years of experience with research data management. The team is led by 3 people, myself, Rong Tang from Simmons University Library School, and Elaine Martin, who is well known in the medical library world, at least for her years of leading boot camps, and has a MOOC actually on the topic through the BD2K program. So this academy will offer 8 units that you can take separately, individually, or as a group to be able to get the assessment and credit from CE credit if you want from Simmons University. All of these units will be hosted online via the Canvas platform. And we chose Canvas because it is predominant in our world, but also because it can be used internationally, including China. We really want this program to be global and used by librarians across the world, as those who can speak English, and we hope in time to be able to translate some of the curriculum into other languages as well. So our timeline, when this idea first formulated, was when I first started with Elsevier, and I was asked, what would you need as a librarian to be successful in the future? And I thought, you mean what my user needs are? And they're like, no, what you as a librarian will need. And I just was like, oh my gosh, no one's ever asked me that. So I was thinking back to the time when I was directing a medical library at University of Utah, and big data was just coming on the horizon. And I really hadn't gotten my head around what kind of services our library should offer for this kind of big data management, and also what kind of sustainability program could be put in place to fund staff and faculty and librarians who could work with this area. So I thought, I think we need to know more about research data management. So I thought that was true, and I talked to Elaine, who was a friend, a colleague of mine, and she said, yes, I think so too, and I've been trying to do this, but I also need to get some funding because I've been putting proposals to different grant agencies without any success. And so I said, well, if I could get funding from Elsevier, could you get the group of team project made people from the different libraries to work with us? So we combined our efforts and put together this idea for the Academy. But we wanted to be sure that we weren't stepping on area that had already been developed by others, as we knew there were a lot of training programs going on. And we also wanted to be sure that we were able to comprise a curriculum that would be meeting a unique niche and need of librarians. So through our Library Connect program at Elsevier, we did a needs survey to find out what people wanted to know more about RDM, how successful they felt they already were with their training, what kind of gaps they foresaw. So we did a survey from the summer of till the fall of 2018. But we also did a competency scan by looking at different job descriptions in this area and looking for the qualifications that were required, the skill sets. And then we did an inventory, extensive inventory of the training that was already available and what was being offered by library schools and information schools as well. And in addition, we did a listserv survey with 2 educator groups, the Jess and the Elise groups. So all of the results of these needs assessments and inventories are openly available at this GitHub site mentioned here. And I really encourage you to take a look at it, because besides the interest of what people felt they needed, there is a lot of information there about what else is out there as far as training. As we can't cover everything and didn't want to, we wanted to be unique, but the inventory provides a lot of training opportunities. So as I mentioned, we did this needs assessment between April and September of 18. We had 19 questions that were part of that survey, and we solicited people through email, listservs, blog posts on Library Connect, word of mouth, different conferences, events, and we got 241 responses. And the majority of those came after intense conference season, so after the end of May, we got a lot of responses. And I think what's interesting is of the 241 replies, 628 open answered responses came in that we also hand-coded. And this was very informative, where people went beyond expressing from the questions what they felt their needs were. So I want to thank everyone who took the time to address that survey, and I hope that we're able to accommodate a lot of your requests with our program. So some of the question examples were, what research data management services do you currently offer? And as you can see, there were 63 of the 241 who currently had programs, or at least answered that they had programs, with the primary one being RDM planning, kind of working with data plans and helping people with their grant requirements, especially NSF and NIH that have data sharing plan requirements. Second one was no surprise that data sharing was mentioned, and then data discovery and access and preservation were the other top current services. Next question we asked was, do you personally feel prepared to offer such services? And we had more respondents, 87, and about 70% said yes, but 30% said no. But as we went deeper and asked more questions, such as for those who didn't feel prepared, we wanted to know why. And most of the indications here were lack of knowledge, lack of training, some training but not enough, and also wanting to get some real specific hands-on training. The biggest write-in comments were that we've heard all about these different coding platforms like Jupyter Notebook and R and Python, but we don't know what that quite means. We haven't had to work with it. So can you show us hands-on examples of what these software programs are used for? And then we asked, what further training do you need? And it's a little tough to read there, but it was the idea that they really wanted this hands-on technical exposure to the coding and the different software tools that were available to researchers, and then also how to be setting up services. The other key item we heard was that they needed advocacy support for explaining the value of offering such data services not only to their institution and researchers within their institution, but in some cases to the library administration. So those were some of the unique needs. And the other key thing we heard was, I can't take time off. I can't get out of my day job to be able to take a hardcore on-site training program. So online training would be really, really helpful. So when we looked at the educators, we talked and actually worked with about 6 of them, 5 in the North America area and 1 in Europe. And we found that there are courses being offered. There's a list of about 5 of them. You know, no surprise, analytics, capturing data, visualization of it, mining it, managing it. And that courses were being offered in a variety of formats. But most of them did require, you know, on-site attendance at some of the sessions, and also a lot of overlap between what they were saying were needed and what we had seen in the actual librarian responses. The fun part was analyzing current job descriptions. We looked at 44, and we looked at also 16 websites of 14 data-related groups to see what was being requested in new positions. And that Wordle at the bottom kind of gives you an idea of what the big topics were. Data management plans, metadata, security, analytics, infrastructure, that should be, came up big too. And that was the other big need we saw, was people wanted a little bit more explanation of what happens in research labs and where could a librarian be working in context with those individuals or working with them if they were not able to be within the lab itself. So we were able to come up with looking at 164 different programs that exist already for training, MOOCs, webinars, and workshops, and we analyzed those programs. And then, as I mentioned before, we looked at formal curriculum, not just in library schools, but also in data science. And we found that, yes, there's courses in ALA accredited programs and iSchools, but there are also courses being offered from computer science departments and others in the institution. So again, I recommend you look at that GitHub site. It's got a lot of valuable information about what training's out there and completes the academy courses that I'm about to describe. So our next phase is phase 2 that we've been working on this spring, and it should conclude in September. We've been putting together these 8 units based on the needs that we heard, and we hope that we've created a special niche area. We hope that we've addressed these key items that were needed. We worked then with Simmons University's online program, have contracted with them to actually create our instructional design for the course and academy. And we've been doing videos, and we'll have tests, and we'll have user tests of our program development here in the next 2 months. And then we hope to be able to launch it this fall, hopefully September. But we will be getting another Library Connect article issued where you can sign up to be told when we're going to release this if you want to go ahead and get registered. Again, this course will be 8 units. It'll be all online on Canvas. The good news is there will be no charge for this. This is something Elsevier and the team wanted to offer to librarians to help them be successful as they work with the research lifecycle at their institutions. And then the only charge would be if you wanted the CE credit. And that charge will all go to Simmons University as a cost recovery for issuing and administrating this continuing education program. But they will start in the beginning of 2020 because they have to set up some administrative work yet to get that accomplished. But here are the partners, quite a prestigious group of individuals, again, mostly from the Northeast of the Americas, and it's a group that has had many years already working in this sphere of influence as a library with research labs and with researchers. And it's unique, we feel it's unique because it represents librarians in a multitude of regular and medical libraries, university, Simmons University, it's offering their support for faculty development and also for accreditation, and then Elsevier as a commercial publisher and analytic information company. So we're quite pleased with our success to date. And I did want to share who is involved in this, as you may know some of them. Again, the leadership is Elaine Martin, Rong Tang from Simmons, and myself from Elsevier. And we have hired a project management person who is a Simmons University Library School student. And also we worked with Simmons Online and working with their instructional designers, the main one being Elaine Brederkin. So at the Simmons, it's been Sandra Les and Christian Paulson that we've been working with. And here's the whole list of faculty. In case you know anybody, you can reach out to them and hear their experience. But it's just been an awesome team, and I'm quite pleased with how everyone's been working together and sharing their expertise. And I think that will be the real value of this. It won't be a person who's explaining RDM who doesn't have innate knowledge of working in this field. The curriculum, 8 units, and then if you want the CE, there'll be an assessment unit, but here's the 8 units, 4 of which I think could be only used by librarians, and then 4 of which I think you can use with your researchers or researchers can use directly. And the ones I think that can be used with researchers are the foundations course, the first one, and then the last 3 that actually will go into like data analysis and visualization, coding tools, and platform tools. And then the other ones are the ones I've mentioned that were really expressed in the needs assessment. Like, what is the research lab culture like, and how will they be willing to share their information? Will they be, first of all? And then what kind of collection of data are they currently handling, and how are they doing so? And then advocating for the role of libraries within this sphere, working with those who have put services in place to understand what some of the lessons learned, some of the experiences they've had, what to avoid replicating didn't work, and then having project management really directed toward RDM programs specifically as the last unit. So here's each unit, and I won't go through, but they're here in this deck if you want to get more details of what the objectives are for the unit and then who the faculty are that are developing these units. So there's the 2 units, the 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. And here they are in summation format. And then if you want the CE credit, you take a final assessment course and then are able to get the certificate to indicate. And we're hoping that while it won't be a certification, formal one like Microsoft offers, it is one that you'll be proud to put on your resume and will be an indicator to employers that you have taken training in this area. So the CE process is still in development, but we're working with Simmons University to get a certification program. And you, in that case, do have to take all 8 units, pay a small fee, and then they'll be issuing the credit. But in this case, and only in this case, will you need to include your name and who you are. The rest of the units is very anonymous as far as registration, because we want you to feel comfortable taking it. Elsevier won't know who you are, the faculty won't know who you are, but it's really going to be your program, we hope, and that you want to take these units. So our next steps is we'll be completing the unit development. We did all of our videos here in May. We're going to be testing it, as I mentioned, in June and July. And Rong Tang from Simmons is an expert in usability studies, so we have a great backing program for that. And then the CE program will start in 2020. We'll formally launch probably September, but we're saying fall 2019 of the coursework. And then there will be quality assessment tests meanwhile. So with that, I wanted to end so that we do have time at the end of Nikhil's presentation to address questions. I hope, though, I've inspired you and made you want to take these classes. I can tell you from what I've seen, they're going to be pretty awesome. And it is really an opportunity for you to learn from your peer librarians, what they've experienced, what they recommend, and then also give you guidance on how, if you haven't been able to get such services into your institution, how to communicate the value of what you could offer to those in administration at your universities. So I thank you, and please do spread the word. RDMLA, we've shortened it, so again, it can roll off our tongues, and you'll hopefully hear more about it as the months come here soon to the launch. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Nikhil Joshi, and the first half of the discussion was on the RDMLA, RDM Learning Academy. The second half will focus on a product that we've been developing here at Elsevier, and we've recently released to the market called Mendeley Data. And it is an open platform to manage the entire lifecycle of research data. So I'm actually going to show you how it is able to support that aim. And hopefully you'll take away something from this talk. So the motivation behind developing this product, I think, is demonstrated by this slide right here. So we have, in exploring the markets that we've been operating in, have been looking to see how research, specifically publications with data sets, have been growing over time. So on this slide right here, you do see for 5 years in the state of Pennsylvania that publications with data sets have been growing at a CAGR, which is double-digit, and publications without data sets have, in comparison, remained relatively constant. Now, publications with data sets are just taking off, and this is information aggregated at the state level. But what we also find is when we look at other regions of the world, when we look at other regions of the United States, we do see this trend. And this is indicating to us that data sets and their importance in terms of a research output are growing. And there are more questions being asked about who generates data, who should be publishing data, how much data should be shared, how to best manage data, and what to do with data after it's published. Also how to find data. And there is also reason to believe that publishing with data sets is better, not only for researchers, but for the institutions at which they belong. So this graph right here, and you may have to zoom in, is showing actually on the vertical axis the outputs in top 10% citation percentiles. So these are the number of publications which are amongst the most cited. And on the x-axis, or the horizontal axis, you see publications in top 10 journal percentiles. So these are journals which are amongst the top 10% in terms of journal ranking. And what you find is that publications without data sets, while much smaller in absolute number, actually score higher on both fronts, right? Publications without data sets, while much larger in number, do not generally score as high on both fronts. And this is a general trend. And what I mean by that is you will find that there could be instances where this does not always hold true, but we've seen this appear often and often enough where it is something that's worth talking about. And again, this is one of our observations which has motivated some of the product development work that we've done. So at the same time, while in terms of absolute numbers, like I showed on the slide before, publications with data sets are small in terms of absolute number, what we do find is that they also receive many field normalized views. So we still have our y-axis and our x-axis representing the same metrics. What you'll notice this time is that the green bubble is much larger than it was before, and it's also larger than the magenta bubble. And the magenta bubble is representing publications without data sets, and the green bubble is representing publications with data sets. Now, what this is intended to imply is that if we normalize the number of views of all publications across all subject areas to account for discipline-specific behavior, we do see that publications with data sets get more attention. So if we take this slide and the prior two slides that I just showed you together, this indicates that there is some sort of call to action to do something and to perhaps create a service where researchers not only know how to find data, have a secure place to store their data, and then also have an environment in which they can collaborate with their peers on data sets as they prepare the research for publication. So, with that in mind, we had to define what we meant when we described research data. So what's considered to be research data, right? I just mentioned it, but at Elsevier, we include research data, or we assume research data to take multiple forms, right? So the top two forms, raw data and process data, I think are pretty self-explanatory. Both are important, but the sources of these types of data can be numerous, and we've just given 3 examples below. So protocols, methods, workflows are all examples of data sets. Machine and environment settings, also examples. Scripts, analysis, algorithms. There could be many, many more. It's not uncommon to find a data set with extensive lines of different types of data and proprietary data formats, some in non-proprietary data formats. And then it's also not uncommon to find data sets which are just quite small and have maybe 1 or 2 files associated with them. So there's quite a bit of heterogeneity involved in it. But the important point in the take-home message here is that all forms of research data need to be considered, and all forms of research data should be considered for sharing as well. So when we talk about research data, we also need to talk about the life cycles in which research data exists. So right here, you do see the 3 research life cycles. So the first research life cycle is project data. The second research life cycle is open data. And then the third are the metrics on the data itself. So with the project data, you can imagine a researcher in the laboratory needing to inquire on a topic. They could be doing some advanced experimentation and have some instrumentation that outputs data. This is data that is generated in the lab. That data needs to be captured, it needs to be recorded, perhaps using an electronic lab notebook, and it is a source of inputs that the researcher may use in ultimately writing a publication. Similarly, the researcher may use data sets found on research data repositories, research data search services, which are considered to be open data. So these are data sets that have been published. These are data sets which are available for the public to reuse. And that data may also be involved in their experiment. And then the third layer are these metrics on data. So these metrics on data are intended to be important to the researcher and to the institution. So for the researcher, if I am using a data set, I may be interested in seeing how many times that data set's been viewed, how many times that data set has been downloaded. If I've also published my data set, I may want to keep track of who's viewing my data set and who's downloading my data set. If I am at the institution, perhaps in the library, I may be interested in knowing which of my researchers are publishing data, how do we compare in terms of published data sets to peer institutions, and how can I better understand how to work with my faculty when they do publish data sets. So with that in mind, we created a modular product called Mendeley Data. And what I've done here is I have mapped these specific product modules to the different steps of the researcher workflow that I showed you in the prior slide. So data search is a module which, as its name implies, allows you to search for open research data from over 30 repositories. Data Notebook is our electronic lab notebook, which allows you to capture the results of experimentation in the lab and use it as research data. Data Manager is our collaborative project environment, which allows researchers to initiate several projects, invite collaborators, and allow them to make adjustments, make edits to data, and publish data directly from the project environment. The data repository is our repository, and it provides, I think, a lot of the essential features of a data repository: long-term storage, support for versioning, minting of DOIs, and it supports a number of different optional metadata fields and basic metadata fields. And then you can also see that data search, data repository, and this fifth module, data monitor, exist in the other research life cycles that we described. So data repository, of course, is a place to find open data. Mendeley Data, if you do publish there, will have your data openly findable. Data search also finds open data. And then data monitor, the fifth module, is under development. And this is designed to help the librarian understand who's publishing within their university, how to actually stay in touch with faculty that may need to publish data but in fact are not publishing data, and to help faculty with the curation of metadata. So the first module is data search. And the subsequent slides I will be showing you will be describing each of the modules, and will be showing you, I would say, a snapshot of one of their use cases. So right here, what you see right beneath data search is an empty search, which I did the other day, retrieving all data sets, and some data sets in the Mendeley Data repository are shown first. Now, do keep in mind, we do index over 30 repositories. We have over 10 million data sets. And I'd like to add that data search is free to use. So any of you on the line who are interested in trying it out can try it out. What we also do is we also provide support for different types of data. So on the left-hand side, you'll see files. But if you were actually doing the search, you'd also see there's the option of choosing the repository type. There's the option of limiting your search to a specific data repository. And then we also provide deep indexing. So what this means is that we're not only indexing the metadata, we are indexing the actual data set itself and information in there where we can. And you're about to see an example of this on the next slide. Sorry, in the subsequent slide, I apologize for that. So the first use case we support, there are two here. The first use case we support is versioning. So versioning implies I have one version of a data set and I may make a change to the data set. And when I make that change, it's important that I know exactly where that change was and when that change was made. So what we found here is a data set. So I did a search for VEGF inhibitor bowel. And this is a term that comes up in molecular biology. And the first data set I found was one in Mendeley. And you can see when I look at the details and when I look at the user guidance, and then there's a third file there, there's a green checkbox. That indicates that inline file previewing is supported. So there are actually more than one version to this data set. So if I click on this data set, what I can see here is that there are a number of experimental data files associated with it. There's a description, and then underneath the DOI, which has been assigned, there are different versions. And above that are some statistics showing the number of views and the number of downloads. So this seems to be a popular data set. But I can also see that there's version 2. So if I want to see the difference between version 1 and version 2, all I have to do is select compare. And this will actually show me that there are some changes. So in going from one version to the other, one of these files was deleted. And there were actually a couple other changes down below. The screen was truncated. But if you are finding data sets in Mendeley, you will notice that the versioning is made very obvious. And it's very easy to compare different versions. So even if I had 3 different versions, I could compare version 1 and version 3. I can even compare them alongside each other. So this makes it very obvious where the change was made. And if you are a librarian or if you are a researcher needing to keep track of these types of things, this is something that should be important for you. And this is something that's easy to use when using Mendeley Data Search. So we also provide support for deep indexing, like I mentioned. And from 2 slides ago, you remember that I also said that by doing this, we're actually able to capture information in the data set itself. So this is the same data set that we were looking at before. This is the data set that had 2 versions, which we explored. And I mentioned to you that the third file, which has data, supports inline previewing. Now, you may have to zoom in on your screen, but what you'll notice where the red oval is that the word bowel has actually been found in column E. So this is an example of how we're actually able to deep index the data set, because the word bowel actually matches our search string. On the right-hand side, you will see a search on Google Dataset Search, another product, for the same string. And you'll notice that we get 5 results from the repositories that they index. But you will notice that there's not an obvious way to preview the file, and there's not an obvious way to determine whether the indexing goes down to the data set. So one advantage in using Mendeley Data is captured here. The second advantage with inline file previewing has also been demonstrated on the prior slide. So data repository. Data repository is our repository, and keep in mind this is also modular. So a user of Mendeley Data does not necessarily have to have the repository in order to take advantage of some of the other product benefits. But what we do provide, if you are using it, is storage up to 100 gigabytes per data set. We do provide support for versioning, which I showed before. We also provide long-term preservation. So long-term preservation, we do work with the organization called DANS, and DANS Dark archives all published data sets. And I also mentioned that we do have some basic and customizable metadata. So the basic metadata, including a description of the file and description of the data, is easy to provide. And then we also do provide support for some, I would say, popular metadata standards. So Dublin Core is one which is very popular. And we are actually indexed by Google Dataset Search. So I showed you on the slide before a comparison of a search in Mendeley Data and Google Dataset Search. Because we actually comply with the metadata standards used by Google Dataset Search, we as Mendeley Data are actually indexed. So anything within anything that's published within the Mendeley Data repository is actually available when you do search on Google Dataset Search. So we do have that interoperability that way. And then storage, just a couple comments. We do support local storage. We do have customers using Amazon Web Services S3 bucket. So this allows us actually to take advantage of popular and secure cloud technologies. And then we also do have the ability to store it in our cloud via a private deployment. So on the next slide, you'll see how easy it is to create a data set. So if I'm in the Mendeley Data environment and I go to my data sets, I can create a new data set. And let me also add that you as a user can create a data set. It's free. There are some premium benefits with institutional product, which are found in the manager module and are found in the storage that you get with using the premium version. So at the institutional version, you are allowed 100 gigabytes per data set. And with the free version, you are allowed 10 gigabytes per data set. So there are some differences there. So it's very easy. As you can see here, I have 3 data sets, which I've recently created. And if I create a new data set, it's just a matter of clicking on New Data Set. Once I've done that, I can assign a name to that data set. I can associate it with a project. So projects, which you'll find later on, are collaborative work environments where I can add my own data, I can add shared data, and where I can invite others to work with me. In addition to that, I can add data, the actual files, from my own local computer or from other locations. And then you'll notice on the right-hand side that a DOI has actually already been reserved for this data set. Hasn't been minted yet because I have not published it. And you can see below, because I'm using the institutional version, I have 100 gigabytes, and this is the space remaining. So this is not a very large collection of files. And then you can also see what version I've created and when the changes have been made. Once I've associated it with a project, I can then add categories for the data. So Mendeley Data supports the open science taxonomy. So if I wanted to add, let's say, a tag related to biochemistry or biochemical analysis, you can see there's several options for me to choose from. Finally, below, I can choose my license. The Creative Commons licenses do tend to be popular, but we do have support for software licenses, hardware licenses, and the terms and conditions associated with those licenses can be explored further. So once I have actually filled in that information, I have my created data set, and it looks as such. Now, I have a couple options now. I can either continue adding files, I can add more metadata if I'd like, or I could also share it with someone else. So by sending a preview or sharing it, I can send this to anybody, and anybody with the link will be able to see this draft data set. Data Manager, as I mentioned before, is our collaborative workspace. When signed into the institutional version, you will see a My Projects tab right next to My Datasets, indicating that you have institutional access. My projects, as I mentioned before, allows you to incorporate your own data sets stored in your own Mendeley Data repository, or data sets stored in a shared location. So a list here of all my projects can be found. The most recent project I created is associated with the data set that I had recently created. So I actually want to go into this project, and I actually want to find out more. Now, do keep in mind that the data on the project can stay private. You can invite collaborators outside the institution. They cannot start new projects, but they can take part in an existing project that you've invited them to. And like I mentioned before, you can associate multiple data sources with your project, even ELNs. And then annotation of research data can be done here, and then curation can also be done here as well. So if I open up that project, you can see that so far I have not associated any data sources. So the data sources here are data sources which will be shared. But I do have a number of options, which you'll see in a minute. There are no shared data sets that I've brought into the environment yet, and I have not published anything associated with this project yet either. Now you can see that the title of my project is visible at top, and you can also see that there is an option to invite members, and there's only myself. I have not invited anyone else yet to the group, to the project, excuse me. So if I want to add a data source, all I have to do is select Add Data Source, and this gives me several options. So you can see that Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, Azure, and OneDrive, to name a few, are available for you. Now these data sets can live in these locations. What we'll be adding down the line is support for watch folders. So if I make an update or add new data to my Google Drive account, then that data could also appear in my project environment. So that's a nice feature. Similarly, we want to set up watch folders where if I have local data and I add local data to that watch folder, then that data will also appear in my Mendeley Data environment. Now you can also see here that I've actually already associated my Google Drive. So I actually want to go ahead and just point that out. But in this instance, we're going to add a connection to WebDAV. WebDAV is a protocol which allows association or integration with an institutional repository. So no matter what you select, you'll be given this message which says you are about to connect to one of these services. And it will actually specify what we will be taking and what we will not be taking. So if I do choose WebDAV, I will be prompted for some information. Once this is filled out, once I am authenticated, I then have my university storage access to WebDAV available to me. So now you can see that there are several different folders that I have in university storage, which I can now use as inputs to this project. I can also invite additional members. You'll notice the member count went to 2. I haven't published anything yet, but now that I have data here and I have additional members joining the group, I can work on preparing data for publication. So when we talk about the research data lifecycle, going back to the beginning of my presentation, we refer to Data Manager as being in the active data phase. Right? This is where we are collaborating on data prior to publication. So this is how Manager helps researchers move from raw files. These are things that are generated in the lab via an ELN or data sets in your own repository to data sets fit for publication. The other thing I want to mention is that we are providing a number of API integrations. So I mentioned that this is an open platform. And what I meant by open platform is illustrated by this slide. So we do work with a number of leading organizations. So DANS is one I mentioned before. OpenAIR is another organization which is developing the open science research infrastructure in the EU. So we do, we are indexed by OpenAIR Index. And then we also do index the Zenodo repository. We are a DataCite member, meaning DOIs can be minted. We also do use DataCite to capture metadata about datasets where it is incomplete. We were one of the founding members of Scholix. So Scholix is an organization that provides links between publications and datasets, among other things. So this is how we are able, for example, to associate a Scopus record with a dataset in Mendeley Data. This is also how we were able to generate some of the analysis I showed you earlier, showing that publications with datasets do get cited sometimes more often, and also are found in top-tier journals. You'll see here that we want to, down the road, build integrations with other products, such as the DMP tool, to support machine-readable data management plans. And then on the bottom, you'll see we have a number of different Elsevier product integrations, which provide different types of functionality. As I mentioned on Scopus, for those of you using Scopus, if you do a document search, you will see a link on the upper right-hand side to actually find the data sets associated with that search. This is using Scholix. So this is an example of an integration we've had for some time within our own products, internal and external integration. And then we also are integrated with Pure. We do integrations with Plum Analytics. And Science Direct, if you do publish in an Elsevier journal and link your data sets, those will be searchable within Mendeley Data. Some of you may be asking, how is this different from Mendeley? So the Mendeley platform really is behind all of this. So if you do have a Mendeley account, you can begin using Mendeley Data for free. You will see a link to my data sets. And if you do go there, you will be redirected to data.mendeley.com. It's there where you can find research data. You can create a data set subject to the 10 gigabyte limitation. And you can also publish the data set in Mendeley if you'd like to do that as well. The institutional features include the data manager and the project environment I showed you, 100 gigabyte storage per data set, and also a number of paid APIs which support different integrations. And that is all I have. Both Gene and I are happy to take questions from anyone on the line.
We have a few questions in the queue here, and as Nikhil said, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A module, and we'll get to as many as we have time for. All right. So we have a question here for Nikhil. Melissa asks, what is the file size limit with Mendeley Data? Also, how long does it take for the data to be moderated?
So the first question, the data set itself can be 100 gigabytes. And let's keep in mind that the data set can include multiple files. So as long as none of those files exceed 100 gigabytes, you should be okay. And this is with the institutional version. With the free version, you're limited to 10 gigabytes. So the same criteria apply. The moderation is a good question. I don't know how long it takes. What happens once you publish it is we do have a team which makes sure that it is scientific data. It can take a couple days. And once that check is complete, then the data should be available in the Mendeley Data repository and searchable.
Excellent. Got a question for Gene that came through. And it says, a question for Gene on course design. Will this course content design include research data in the fields of humanities, or is it a course primarily for the science disciplines?
Oh, the great question. And for this particular group of faculty, they're very much in the science and medical library world. So this program will be more for basic and clinical science a little bit. We do, I think, more basic science data. But I think some of the principles could be applied for humanities. So again, how to articulate the need. I think you can use a lot of the lessons learned to be able to replicate a service for humanities. But again, the science and medical STEM area is probably more applicable. And if I may, I did see a question about whether you had to have Canvas on your campus. And luckily, we don't have that requirement. We were able to work with Canvas to give us access, free version for this program. So we have the arrangement with Canvas. You don't need it at your institution.
Whoops, I was muted there. Great, great.
Okay.
We've also got another question for you, Jean. And they're coming through in the chat, it looks like, so you may not necessarily see those. The question is, will the syllabi for the RDMLA courses be available for viewing pre-sign-up?
There's a little bit about the objectives here in the deck, but we don't really have a print syllabi prepared. I mean, each unit has been worked on by the faculty indicated, but you can get a flavor for what will be included if you look at those objective slides.
Great.
I did see one about how do we find out when it's launched, and there will be another Library Connect article coming out within the month that will give you a link where you can register so that you are notified directly. But I'm sure we're going to be putting it out on listservs and different formats too to alert people. So, and if you really want just to email me in September, that's fine too.
Great. We have a question here from Christine, and perhaps it would be interesting to put to both of you. Christine asks, what are some of the components of research data culture that librarians might find surprising? And Nikhil, do you have any thoughts on that?
I can give you my thought on that, and then I'll let you share hers.
Sure.
I think there is a lot of excitement about research data, not only in the library, but I think also in the research community amongst researchers themselves. It seems to be something, especially that younger faculty are kind of getting all over. And I also think that it dovetails perfectly with ambitions related to open science. I think people also in research recognize we can do better research when we share the work that we're doing, when we work together, and when results are available for all. I also think that people are beginning to recognize that this could soon have legal ramifications. So funders, I think, are sharpening their teeth when it comes to their open science and open data policies, and the accountability which I think will come down the line for institutions to have a system in place to allow them to keep track of research data, to ensure that researchers are properly managing their data and depositing it where it needs to go. It could become more significant and more onerous as time goes on. So I think right now we are in sort of an early stage, maybe even a naive stage, depending on where you're located. But I would imagine in the next 5 years, things will change. And I think there will be systems which will be adopted to deal with this. I think there will be new roles perhaps created in the library to help support this. And I think the attitudes of researchers towards sharing will also change as well.
And I think what will be the biggest surprise for librarians is how easy they can help a lab. Just with knowing how different labs work, there's just a lot of labs don't have any organization in mind of how to collect data and be sure to preserve it. And I've heard, as we all have, about the flash drives leaving with each student. So just while we may not know all the subject areas of the research that we would be assisting, I think we'll be surprised how easily we can give value to that lab for helping to document and recognize the importance of articulating who contributed to the lab and how to preserve the data for access. And also, as more publications require data sets be adjacent or included somewhere in a repository so they can be linked, I think we'll see the ability to articulate to the laboratory authors where their options are for publishing and also for the data set locations. So I think we'll be surprised, I guess, how easily will be needed once we get the researchers to understand what we can contribute to their work.
Great. And forgive me if you've addressed this already, Jean, but the question there from Andrea that says there's some overlap between scholarly communication concepts like open and issues of open relate to issues in RDM. Are those sorts of things going to be covered in these courses?
Again, we kind of try to not address what a lot of other people have. I think there's a lot of course already out there on open science as a theory or as a philosophy. So we're pretty much more practical. We took not the theoretical high road, but the practical high road. And I think it's really be, what do you really need to be doing if you're going to be helping researchers? But of course, like I said, it does, as you're working with them, give you the chance to have those conversations about openness and the importance of having data be readily usable by others so science can be replicated. And the more that you share, the more science other people can access what you've done to confirm it or to, also not confirm it, which may be why some people don't want to share. But I think, as Nikhil greatly illustrated, this whole platform that Elsevier has, and there's other companies that are developing similar platforms. The goal was to be meeting the FAIR principles, which is, the findable, the accessible, the interoperable, and the reproducible. And we really do believe and know that research labs have their own tools and have developed a lot internally already, so they can plug and play with what we offer and others to create this open environment.
Excellent, excellent. I see another question here for Jean, and this one comes from Hannah, who says, I'm starting a faculty librarian position in research data management this summer, and I'm very interested in the RDMLA course. Are there opportunities to become involved with the team itself and helping develop, expand, administer, those sorts of things? Are there those sorts of opportunities out there, or?
Yeah, I would say we're really hoping that this isn't the end all. We recognize that as soon as you set something in screenshots, it's going to change. So we know that we have to update, and we know and desire to add to the content. So Hannah, please reach out to me or Elaine, and we'll see what we can do together. It'd be great.
Excellent. Great. All right, and we'll allow folks just a minute or two here to drop any other questions that they have into the Q&A. Yeah, please, go ahead.
There's a question from Jan. Jan, if you're still on the line. That was dropped in the chat at 11:04.
Aha, all right.
The question was, I recently inquired in May regarding an institutional account, but was informed by our Elsevier representative that it was no longer available. Could you please clarify? So I think what you are referring to is Mendeley Institutional Edition, which is no longer being offered. So Elsevier started offering Mendeley Institutional Edition in, I think, 2013 or 2014, and the decision was made this year to stop offering it. We're still supporting the existing clients that do have it. This is a separate product, and I know it's confusing. Mendeley Data is an institutional research data management product. So this has no relationship with Mendeley Institutional Edition, and Mendeley Data is very much available for sale.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you for spotting that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. So we are coming up on the close of the hour. So I would just say thank you, Nikhil and Jean, for spending your time today with us and for going through all this information. And there's a lot here. So thank you very much. All right. And I would just remind everybody else out there listening in that we did record the program, so be on the lookout for that follow-up email from ACRLN Choice with a link to the recording. Also, and let me drop it in here, you should also receive a link to our follow-up survey. If you can take a minute and fill that out for us, we would really appreciate it. That'll come to you in the email as well. So lastly, thanks to everybody out there for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope the rest of your day is great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.